Thank you. Good morning. We have some announcements today, but first I'd like to take a moment to honor the life and loss of 65-year-old correctional officer Beresford Anthony Morse of Renton, who we lost to COVID-19 on Sunday. Officer Morse had worked at the Monroe Correctional Facility since 2003. He was most recently at the minimum security unit at the Monroe Correctional Center. We wish his wife Mary and their family all the peace that we can send to that family right now. This was a person who professionally was committed to the safety of the state of Washington, and we appreciated his life and work. We also were saddened to learn of the loss of Annie Glenn this morning at age 100, who was married to John Glenn, of course, who was a great advocate for people living with communication disorders during her life. I got to know her just a bit, such a charming person. And the reason I mentioned this is actually the first person I've known personally who we lost to COVID-19. I've had quite a number of people who are relatives, lost relatives, but it just strikes home that this is still an emergency we're dealing with. We are still committed to individual lives. These are not statistics, and I believe the state of Washington needs to continue our course of making good, solid decisions based on science at the right pace as we reopen our state, and we're talking about that effort today. I'm joined today by Secretary of the Department of Health, Secretary John Weisman. He's going to talk about some new opening of more counties in our state, as well as State Health Officer Kathy Lofy. We also have Department of Commerce Secretary Lisa Brown, who is going to be talking about some of the small business grants that we are offering. And we also have Rob Owen from Owen's Grocery in Pend Oreille County. First off, we have some, I think, some good news for our state. Today we are expanding more opportunities for more states or more counties to be able to move to phase 2 of our recovery program. Today we're announcing new criteria that will allow 10 more counties to apply for a variance to allow them to move forward on their phase 2 operations. And they will be eligible to apply if they have less than 10 new cases per 100,000 residents over a 14-day span. This criteria for the next phase of our recovery plan is consistent with the CDC guidelines for opening regions nationwide. This obviously is happily going to allow more economic opportunity for states that can qualify, while still really providing the protections we need for the health of our citizens. So if I can show you the 10 counties that will be eligible to apply for these variances, now on the map are Spokane, Adams, Mason, Thurston, Lewis, Clark, Clallam, Kitsap Island, and San Juan counties. We also will show you the graph now of all the counties that are either already have been cleared for phase 2 and the new eligible counties. So as of Monday, we have approved 10 counties to move into phase 2 of our 4-phase Safe Start recovery plan, and that's based on their population and lack of COVID-19 cases. Combined with Jefferson and Grays Harbor counties, which are eligible for a variance but haven't applied as of yet, that makes 22 counties in the state that are currently eligible for a variance upon application or are already moving to phase 2. Combined, these counties represent about 30% of the state's population. As we open up more of our state, I just want to note that our dependence on our local officials in local decision-making will increase, and the need to adhere to our remaining restrictions will obviously be very important for the health of their citizens. Phase 2 has restrictions on activities including crowd sizes as well as mandatory protections for workers. These are very important. These need to be followed so we can save more lives, obviously. And if the local leaders are ready to take on that responsibility, we expect that they'll do so in a very careful and thoughtful way and follow the guidance to keep their citizens safe. I know counties applying want to serve their residents and not just the whole state. One other thing I want to note, that as we open up some of our counties on a more county-based metric, it really is important for people not to overload those smaller, frequently smaller communities in their restaurants or otherwise. It's really a time to remain close to home. And we know some of these smaller communities have tried to reiterate that with us so that they are not overwhelmed. So I hope people can keep that in mind. So now I'd like to turn it over to John Weisman, who can talk more about this application process, which will allow these designated counties to apply for variance that we can then look to make sure they're ready to go. So John.
Good morning, Governor. Thank you for that, and hello, everyone. The application process for these next set of counties is essentially the same process as we had before, in that the process starts with the local health officer recommending to the Board of Health whether or not they think the county is ready to move to phase 2. They do have the option to move to phase 2 with all of the businesses or activities that are listed there, or a subset of them if that would be their recommendation. Once the local health officer makes that recommendation to the local Board of Health, the local Board of Health then must consider that recommendation, must take a look at the situation in their county and determine if they want to move forward with a phase 2 approach and whether they want to do all of phase 2 or a portion of that. The local Board of Health then sitting again, thinking about the public's health, takes a vote around whether or not they want to move to phase 2. Each of the hospitals in that county need to also be engaged in this process. And if for some reason there's not a hospital in that county, then the hospitals that people are referred to have to be engaged. And they have to explicitly state that they have surge capacity, at least 20% surge capacity to handle more cases, and that they have at least a 14-day supply of all the personal protective equipment, the N95 respirators, the surgical masks, the gowns, for that kind of equipment, so that they can safely take care of patients and keep their healthcare workers safe. And they have to report their numbers daily to the health department for tracking their personal protective equipment as well as their hospital capacity. Once all of those things are in place, then the county commissioners are called together to vote on whether or not they want to accept the Board of Health recommendation to move forward. And they can only either accept or reject that request. They can't sort of in other ways modify that. That sort of starts the process then for the local health department to formally put together their application. And local health departments have to give us information around their testing capacity in the community, how many tests they're actually doing, how they are assuring access for folks who might be uninsured, who might have other languages, and to make sure that folks who traditionally are underserved have equal access to testing, both in terms of the speed and the services that are available. Then there's also the need for them to outline their capacity to be able to receive positive cases, those folks, to interview them, be able to help support them in making sure that they're able to safely house themselves in their home and not expose others in the home to COVID, and to be able to identify who their close contacts were, those being people that they've spent 10 minutes or more with in 6 feet of distance while they have been infectious. And that infectious period can be 2 or 3 days before the onset of symptoms and then from symptoms. So the health department has to demonstrate their capacity to do this work and their capacity to interview folks within the 24 and a 48-hour period. So we're looking to make sure that the support is there for the local health department to be able to quickly and effectively respond to any new cases. We also ask them to outline for us the community's capacity to house people who might be ill with COVID and don't need hospitalization, or who have been a close contact, but for whatever reason can't safely do that at home. Maybe they don't have a home, maybe there's somebody who's immunocompromised in the home, so it's just not a safe place to be. So they need to demonstrate then that the county, the community, has capacity for folks to be housed there. And I will note that that housing is without charge to the individuals who need the service. So that is something that the government pays for folks. So that should not be a barrier, and for the services that they need to be able to safely be there. They have to demonstrate as well this capacity to provide assistance to folks who are safely housing themselves in their own home, should they need food or other kinds of services, and their ability to work with the community to provide that. It's just so important with this as we move from these phase 1 to phase 2, and as we start restarting our economy, that people who are having symptoms or who have had close contact stay home, do not infect other folks. And we have to make sure that they have the support to be able to successfully do that. And then we also ask the health departments to indicate to us their capacity to perform outbreak investigations. So we know that COVID has not gone away. Even in these communities, there will be more cases. We need to, however, make sure that the community, that the health department is prepared to respond to an outbreak in a nursing home, a long-term care facility, in some kind of workplace, whatever that workplace might be, that might have a number of cases. And we're certainly seeing hotspots around the state in places like meatpacking and produce production places. So we need to make sure that a health department is prepared to quickly get on those, test people if necessary, put the control measures in place to see to it that it doesn't spread. So this really is a community effort. It requires our elected officials and others to support them. It requires them to support the community in implementing these safe behaviors in terms of returning to business. We know that everybody wants to be responsible, and we want to help people be able to follow those guidelines. So that's the process, and once those applications are completed, they're turned into the Department of Health for review, and then ultimately my decision-making around whether or not we think they are ready to move forward with safely being able to monitor the situation and respond. So with that, Governor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, John, and thanks for your work on this. And by the way, we know next January you're going to another responsibility, and I want to thank you for what you've been doing for our state to date. I know you've been working really hard and in a very thoughtful way to have a public health expert who's nationally recognized, and you are. When I talk to Dr. Fauci and others, they recognize your talents, and we appreciate it, but you're not done. We know that. Look, this is really something we ought to feel good about in the state of Washington. The ability of people going back to work, the ability of people going back to restaurants after this most difficult time of economic anxiety and social distress, to be able to move forward like this is really something that is something to celebrate. And we ought to do that. But I do want to just put my oar in the water on this issue that we do have to still recognize that we've made progress, but we're just so far from being out of the woods. I know some people sort of say, well, we should start worrying about the second wave of the virus. And when I hear that, I think, well, when did the first wave pass? Because it is not. We still are having somewhere 150, 200 people a day infected. This is not past. We have flattened the curve, but it continues to haunt us and infect our communities. We have communities, and for instance, Yakima, one of the highest infection rates in the western United States right now. So I think this moment is, I hope people do enjoy sort of 1 point joy and celebration and maybe 2 parts responsibility, because our ability to really succeed now depends on these counties that are going to be able to go to phase 2. Their really responsible behavior is going to be a guide for the rest of the state and be necessary for us to ultimately succeed. So I think that cautious, well-informed, scientifically reasoned measures are what we're going to need these local communities to show the way forward for the rest of the state of Washington. And the reason is clear. This has been too painful. We do not want to do this twice. We want to get this behind us. So we're going to look forward to the leadership in these local communities as they move forward. We know the consequences of this is tough. I just this morning heard that there's some cities in Germany that are having to go back to lockdown. We do not want to have to do that. So we'll look forward to local leadership really helping us make sure that we continue this journey of beating this virus. Bottom line is we still live in the era of COVID-19. And we're going to continue to look at data and make adjustments. Again, all the metrics we rely on, we talked about some of them today, but they're available to the public on our COVID-19 risk assessment dashboard, and that's found at coronavirus.wa.gov. Now, we have some more good news. Early this year, we allocated $10 million in our strategic reserve fund to assist impacted small businesses, with grants of up to $10,000 apiece to help them through this storm. And thanks to the work of the Department of Commerce and Lisa Brown, I'm pleased to announce the first round to 501 grant recipients from 20 counties across the state. These include businesses in hard-hit industries like retail, restaurants, construction, hospitality, salons, gyms, and theaters. They also represent a very broad cross-section of the small business owners of Washington, women, minority, tribal, veteran-owned businesses. We know these businesses can use this money to pay rent and utilities and supplies and inventory and non-payroll expenses. And for many of them, we hope this is a bridge to get them to the other side of this crisis. So to talk about that, I'll turn this over to Lisa Brown.
Thank you, Governor. You've described the program. I have to say, looking over the list of the businesses that are receiving the initial grants is a testament to Main Street USA and Main Street Washington. If you know a community, you will know some of these businesses because they are small businesses, sometimes family-owned, and they give each community its unique character. And we want to thank our partner organizations, which are the associate development organizations in each county of Washington State. Every county has one of these organizations, whether it's the Pend Oreille Economic Development Council or Greater Spokane Incorporated in Spokane County, and they were our partners in receiving the applications, making the first cut, forwarding them to us so that we can send them on to the governor's office. And they are the ones in touch with the businesses in their community. I really appreciate the work they put in to this program. And also our business resiliency organizations that help us by being peer connectors to the small businesses in their communities, such as the Tacoma Urban League or the Tri-Cities Hispanic Business Council. They also assisted small businesses in receiving these applications and making recommendations. Now, we know this isn't enough with overwhelming need right now that small businesses have as they look at safely reopening for themselves, their customers, and their employees. They've got costs, and these $10,000 grants may not cover all of them. So we also want to acknowledge that there are other resources out there, and we will be working for continued resources, whether it's support from the federal level, more at the state level, and the support that's coming in from local governments and private philanthropy. And it's most important to us that we are able to maintain this connection with these small businesses, hear what their needs are, and help navigate through this really challenging time. So thank you, Governor, for giving us the opportunity to talk about this today.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for having a well-considered way of this application process. We know in the grand scheme of things, this is not a giant number, but we do want to show our appreciation for the small businesses that are the heartbeat of our smaller communities. And we know what it means to them and their neighbors. We have one of those small business owners here with us, Rob Owen. Rob is the owner of a family grocery store in Newport in Ponderay County. His family store has been in business since 1938. And Rob, I wonder if you have a few comments.
Yes, first off, I'd just like to thank the Ponderay County Economic Development Council and Jamie Wyrowick for helping us through the grant process, and the city of Newport and Russ Pelleberg, our city administrator. Obviously, the state, Ms. Brown and yourself, Mr. Inslee, for allocating these funds to businesses such as ourselves. And most importantly, our community and our customers that have continue to check in on us and support us during these trying times. Like I said, we were started in 1938 by my great-grandparents. I'm the fourth generation, and right now downstairs I have the fifth generation doing some real-world schoolwork, learning how to run a business. And I just can't begin to explain how much this community means to my family. And the grant process helps bring in outside dollars that unfortunately, based on these times, we're not able to see right now because our community is so dependent on Canadians coming down and with the border being closed and with people going up to Priest Lake and to open up their summer cabins. We rely on those outside dollars to come in, and so this grant will certainly help with some of those things. The challenges have been very, very great, but I promised my employees from all of this stuff taking place and from the day that you announced the strategies that you were going to take for this, and I promised my employees that I would keep them on the payroll and make sure that they have a paycheck coming in. But we still have challenges. Our main grocery supplier and our main retail supplier made a corporate decision to stop servicing businesses such as mine. They felt that they were overwhelmed. And so I placed an order, and then I was called by my sales rep, and I was told that don't expect to get product because we just can't do it. So for the last couple months, I've been driving to various retail outlets and wholesale places in Spokane to gather supplies to bring back to the community, so we can have items to put on our shelves and to supply our customers. Unfortunately, we don't have the multi-million-dollar budget that some of these larger companies have for advertising and those sorts of things. So we really rely on the word of mouth and our local customers. And when we don't have those products, it becomes trying to have them, they tell people, well, they're out of this or out of that. And so unfortunately, we do lose customers that way. And as this started to go, my business especially was coming out of our slow season. Typically, December, January, February are our slow months. So we use those summer months to build up a reserve to make it through those slow months. And we kind of had hit the bottom, and then unfortunately this pandemic hits, and we don't necessarily have the reserves to make it through this. So it's greatly appreciated that you guys are here to help us, because we've seen our sales decrease probably 50% or more. But again, you know, my employees in this community mean so much to myself and my family that we're committed and we're very thankful for the small business grants, because I look at some of the federal things and they talk about small businesses being 500 employees or less, and I just laugh at that, and I think I have 6. You know, I guess I might be like a micro business. I'm not sure what, but for it to be, you know, this grant to be allocated to the equivalency of 10 full-time employees or less, I think really helps, because we don't have the accountants and we don't have those things that can go out and help us find some of these federal funds to do these sorts of things. So it is certainly greatly appreciated for everything that this is going to do for us. And again, I just want to say, you know, thank you to Jamie and to Russ and to yourself and to Ms. Brown for this fund. And kind of on a personal note, when you were a gubernatorial candidate, you actually stopped into my business, and one of your staffers took a picture of the front of my building, and one of our local customers found on, I believe it was Facebook page at the time, you had done a chalk sketch of the front of our building. So I printed off a copy of that, and we have some of those pointed out down here. So when people come in, I'm like, well, here's our claim to fame that the governor drew a picture of the front of our building. So again, I just want to say thank you for these grants, and I will make sure that we do everything I can to help keep our community strong. Thank you.
Rob, that was so inspirational to hear your story, and we want to make sure that you get several more generations at that store. You know, you just pointed out everything that's great about small businesses and small towns. That you kind of remind me of George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life. You know, you just keep your whole community going. I know you're doing that. I hope this is going to help you out. I will tell those stories. So this morning, we were just having our briefing about what we were going to talk about today about this small business grant program. And they said, well, my staff told me we're going to have somebody from this small business talk. And I said, well, who's that? And they said, well, it's a little grocery store over in Ponderay County in Newport. And I said, I might know that business. And what business is it? And they said, well, it's Owen's. And I go, oh, really, Owen's? Well, that's interesting, because I stopped by and I have such a strong memory of your Huckleberry ice cream. It was incredible. Now, I cannot endorse your business. I can't endorse any businesses, but I can say that Huckleberry ice cream memory still sticks with me. And on my dresser at home, I did little sketches when I was running for governor in 2012. And so I'm going to put my little doodle up here. And I got to tell you, I love your front of your store, and I love the story you just told. And it's just an honor to know you. And I hope this is going to work out for you, and you're going to be a good example for other businesses. So thanks, Rob, and thank your daughter. I'll look forward to when she's the CEO too. Okay. With that, why don't we stand for questions?
First question comes from Rachel with AP.
Governor, will different criteria apply to the larger counties moving to phase 2, or will they also be eligible once they have the same ratio of new cases based on population over that 2-week period? And then a question for Secretary Weisman or Kathy Lofy. Will the state be able to test every nursing home resident and staffer by May 25th, which is recommended that the White House made last week? And will the state then be able to test every nursing home staffer on a regular basis afterward?
I'll start. So basically, our intention at the moment is to have this criteria as we move forward and potentially other counties. I will hasten to say, though, that this is always subject to change depending on what's happening with the virus. And so that's our present thinking, but we have to look at what's happening to the virus, and it could change up or down as time goes on. But we think this is a very scientifically credible, thoughtful way to make decisions, and I'm pleased on how we've done that. So John or Kathy, you want to talk about long-term care facilities?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So yes, we've met with the governor. We are preparing to quickly test every nursing home resident in the state that hasn't already been tested in some kind of outbreak setting recently, and the staff who work for them, as well as for the folks who are in memory care. That's going to be the first out. We are working on an announcement about that. We will be looking to do that in a 2-week period of time to have that happen. So the May 25th timeline for us is going to be more towards the end of the month. And then we are looking at all of the other long-term care facilities as well, with intention of providing testing or having testing at those sites as well, and the staff there. So all of that will be announced in the next couple of days more formally. And we are then looking at a plan to be able to have those staff retested on a periodic basis. So yes, we are moving in that direction. We think that's a good policy, and are ramping that up. Of course, all of this does depend on testing supplies. And I know the governor's had conversations about this in the past, and we continue to work on that as well.
Yeah, just a note on testing. The limitation to date has been on not having enough testing capability to do these long-term care facilities. And we think now that we've been able to get a little more equipment for the sampling, because we've built the analytical capability, as you know. In fact, we were getting a new machine from a manufacturer in Switzerland, from Roche, for the University of Washington, I believe. I had conversations with the CEO about that. So we've had good analytical capability, but as you know, we've not had the swabs in the test kits. We've had a little improvement of that. We've got the second shipment from the federal government of about over 100,000 swabs that came in either yesterday or the day before yesterday. And those were, we think, the kind we really need, the nasopharyngeal, to do this kind of testing. So we're pleased that that testing capability is going up to be able to do this. I want to reiterate, though, is we still are a long ways from having the testing capability that we actually need. And that's why we continue to ask the federal government to increase the manufacturing of this material so that we can get all the test supplies we need, including not just medical facilities, but in fruit packing plants and meat packing plants and manufacturing plants, where having testing is very important to our reopening criteria. So that remains a very high priority. Now, we are also buying this material itself as a state. We're buying this material from sources all around the world, and that has been a central intention of us from day one. And of course, that's not without its glitches either. We have hundreds of thousands today in a warehouse, but it hasn't been cleared by the federal government to use them yet. And so we hope that hurdle can be overcome as quickly as possible. So we have a lot more work to do on testing.
Next question comes from Jim with the spokesman review.
Governor, two questions, if I could. One sort of a detailed question. Spokane County has already submitted a request to go to phase 2. Will it have to reapply, start from scratch, or really amend the application that it already submitted? And then for these communities, if they have businesses that are already opening in phase 1, we have some bars and coffee shops that have opened in the Spokane area. How is the state going to sort of enforce the restrictions if you already have businesses that are jumping the gun when they're in phase 1?
Well, those bars need to be in compliance with the order. If they're not in compliance with the order, they're being unsafe. They're exposing their patrons to danger. They're increasing the risk of deaths in Spokane County, and that's just not acceptable. And they need to be responsible citizens. And if they're not in compliance, they need to come in compliance. We're going to have some more things to say in the upcoming days from the Attorney General about the need for people to comply. And I say that because the need for compliance is going to increase as we all sort of loosen up our requirements. We're going to have an increased degree of personal responsibility to maintain social distancing. And so if there are bars that open, that is extremely disappointing, and they need to come in compliance. And we'll be talking to the Attorney General about that. And not only is it a matter of opening, but it's opening in a safe way. Because as we reopen restaurants at less than 50% of capacity, there's a host of things that people will need to do to keep themselves safe and the employees safe. So if there are people that are showing a blatant disrespect for that, that needs to change. And the public needs to let them know about it. And local officials need to let them know about it too and take some action. It's just not acceptable. It is too dangerous. Your other question about the application, it depends on what the previous, if the previous application included the information the state needs, that should be enough. But I don't know whether it does or not. You heard John talk about the need to show the testing capability and the contact tracing capability and the surge capacity. Those things need to be demonstrated. So if they're not in the first application, they'll need to give that information to the county. From my limited knowledge, I think Spokane's in pretty good shape for hospitals. We'll need to know what their contact tracing situation is, because that's really important. We just can't let this thing spring back, and the ability to find people who have the disease and make sure that they isolate so they don't infect other citizens in Spokane County is very important. So we'll look forward to what the county has proposed in that regard.
Next question comes from Essex with Cairo.
Governor, a question for you and a question for the Secretary.
I'm sorry, Essex, we're losing you here. Can we try a different mechanism here?
Let's see, are you hearing me there now?
Essex, it doesn't sound great. Could you hop off and hop back on with a different microphone?
Could you try?
Okay, we're going to come back.
We'll come back to Essex.
Next question will come from Jerry with the Everett Herald.
Governor, one follow-up from yesterday and then a new question today. But yesterday I asked about the billing plan for PPE, and you said it was a decision. Discussions were still going underway. The counties, Snohomish County, Island County, other counties in that area are really do not want this to happen. I've read a letter they're preparing to send if they haven't already. It says now is not the time to adjust midstream. They worry it'll make things worse because, as you know, of the difficulty getting the supplies. So at this point, I mean, why go forward with billing the counties? Why does the state feel it needs to do it? And secondly, you mentioned compliance. There is two gyms that were sued by the AG today. And I wonder if you might have any comments on the action against those businesses.
Look, the businesses, there's just no reason why certain people would think they're kind of special and they have certain rights that other citizens do not. And right now, these businesses are violating the law. They're endangering their patrons, and not just their patrons. It's the patrons' families and the patrons' neighbors. I heard I caught a little interview with one of these gym owners that wants to go ahead and violate the law because they think they're just above the law, apparently. And I heard him say, well, my patrons can come in and, if they want to risk their lives, that's up to them. The problem with that logic is they're not just risking their own lives, they're risking the lives of their families and their neighbors and their co-workers who can go to the gym where people are really breathing heavily. And what we've learned is that this virus is much more transmittable when people breathe heavily, when they sing, even when they talk loud, and certainly when they huff and puff on exercise machines. They project this virus much farther than in normal breathing. So if you want to be a hero and want to risk your life going to a gym, maybe that would be fine. But the problem is you might be infected by somebody else there. Then you go home and infect your child, or you infect your co-worker at Boeing, or you infect your neighbors. Those people are the people we're trying to protect. And these gyms right now are presenting a clear and present danger to the citizens of our state, and they need to follow this law. So, and if they don't, there are potential civil penalties under the Consumer Protection Act of thousands of dollars, which should not be necessary. This just should not be necessary. And the reason it shouldn't be necessary is we have such broad compliance. The vast majority of business people are complying with this, and they're making tough decisions. Look, it's tough to shut down your business. You got payment, you got people you need to pay the payroll. This is hard. They're making some really hard decisions, and because they're being responsible. So for some irresponsible business leaders to besmirch the ones that are being responsible, that just won't stand, and they need to change their behavior. The question on the county, we have not actually made a demand right now. We are considering this issue. The reason it is at least being considered is that there are new dollars coming in from the federal government that might be able to basically reimburse the county so that the county really doesn't have any additional new responsibility financially, because they can use the new federal money to fulfill that whatever percent they might be called upon as their match. But we have not made that decision yet. We are continuing to talk to counties. And so this is just something that we haven't decided yet.
Next question comes from Chris with King 5.
Governor, good morning.
By the way, if I can add something, excuse me, just for a moment, I want to add this too. One way or another, we're going to make sure that this does not disrupt our ability to get PPE. I will tell you that. We are not going to make any decisions that will result in our citizens getting less PPE. Now, maybe there are decisions about which entity is responsible for what percentage, but we are going to make sure that PPE comes as fast as humanly possible. We're committed to that. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
Yeah, Governor, two questions really. One, has there been any idea, suggestion from your office to counties about the potential for so-called streeteries? Like Calgary has adopted a model where they've opened up streets to allow for restaurants to have more space when they do reopen. And then secondly, unrelated, but also happening today, the president has tweeted that he's pleased to announce that Sound Transit will receive over $166 million in federal funds to keep the transit system open and operational. I'm wondering if you have a response to his tweet.
I had not heard this, so that's good news. Obviously, Sound Transit extremely important, so we appreciate it. I do think that I'm hopeful that that would signal an intention to make larger investments in our transportation system. So that sounds good, but it'll be even more helpful if the administration really will work with Congress to do a major infrastructure package for rebuilding our transportation system in the United States, including public transportation. I think the same thing to be said about renewing and rebuilding our electrical grid in a way that gives us more clean energy. I think the same is true on rebuilding our utilities. So I'm kind of morphing off your question, but we really think, given the huge insult to our economy, we need a very strong federal program of rebuilding the infrastructure of America. And that's good to get us out of this economic doldrums that we are going to be in. The scale of the problem, I think, demands that. And we know we need to do these things anyway. We know we need to have better public transportation. We know we need to deal with clean energy and climate change. We know we have to rebuild our water systems. And so we're hopeful that the federal government can work to do that in the upcoming several weeks and months. And we're hopeful that the House bill that passed, which will really help our local communities provide for teachers and firefighters and police and correctional officers, that the Senate will take that up and pass that. We are in dire straits in our state. Both Republican and Democratic governors are banging that drum about how tough a shape we're in. And so I'm really hopeful that the Senate will follow the House and help these local communities do the things that they so desperately need. Your issue about streets, you know, the state really doesn't have jurisdiction on streets. This is mostly a city and county decision. But where I've seen this done, it certainly looks like a really attractive solution so that businesses and restaurants can have more space out in the front of their buildings to maintain that social distancing. And it seems really worthwhile considering.
Next question comes from Joe with the Seattle Times.
Governor, we've had 2 days now, maybe even a few days, where there have been three or fewer reported fatalities due to COVID-19, and I'm curious if you or the public health officials think that is a beginning of a trend on that front.
Well, we certainly hope so. You know, I just, every day when I open up, I get the EPI report every afternoon, late afternoon, and when I look at those numbers, it's just, you know, your kind of heart stops for a second to figure out the situation. And it has been gratifying. Obviously, any death is an enormous loss, but those numbers do appear to have come down in the last week and a half. But you have to take some caveats with that. One is, what we've learned is it's really important to look for longer trends, not just individual day results. And there is other good news besides the apparent reduction of fatalities, in that we still have a downward trend, it looks like, on our percentage of hospitalizations that are with COVID illnesses. That has dropped down and has stayed a little bit stable the last few days. And that measured on date of onset is good news too, because that sort of, if you look at the data onset, that predicts what you might have in fatalities 2 weeks later. So there's another piece of good news. The concerning news, however, though, is that our modeling has shown that we still aren't down below 1 on the R0 level, meaning how fast the infection is going to continue to build or go down. And we're at about 1, which means the infection level every day, you'd still continue to get 150 or 200 infections every day on the longer term. So the way I would categorize it, one of the modelers the other day says, look, we're just on the knife's edge here, and we had some good news on fatalities, but we're on the knife's edge. We could fall off the other way too, given where we are in that R0 number. So we just got to keep working on this.
Next question comes from Essex with Cairo.
Governor, trying again and hoping you're hearing me okay?
Yeah, that's better.
All right. We're seeing this morning that the Trump administration has timed the end of National Guard deployments to be just 1 day short of the day they would need to qualify for retirement and education benefits. What would you say to Guard members who might feel exploited, and what can you do about it?
Well, I talked to our Congressional delegation call this morning about this, and I'm hopeful that they can reverse that, that really untimely decision, if it is a decision. It's just these people work so hard, they leave their families, they leave their careers. Now they're helping us at our food banks, doing fantastic work at our food banks. I mean, these guys and gals really work hard. As you know, they are a major part of our contact tracing army that we've built, and we don't want to lose them on that day, but we also don't want them to lose the potential benefits. And it looks like the reason the administration did this was to deprive the men and women of increased retirement and educational benefits they could get if they go 90 days, but if they go only 89 days, they don't get those benefits. That seems really unfair to these hardworking people. So we hope that that gets revisited, and I talked to the delegation this morning. I assume the administration is going to be hearing a lot from a lot of people about this subject.
Next question comes from Pablo with Univision.
By the way, including me.
Thank you. My question is about the proposed Washington Worker Relief Fund. We learned that the Seattle City Council has joined hundreds of organizations asking you to create a $100 million fund for undocumented workers who can receive unemployment. Have you received input from people who oppose this proposal? And what would be the challenges in implementing something like this?
Well, we've been considering this now for some time, and we're looking at what we can do, whether the executive branch, the governor, has authority to do this without a statutory authority. And I haven't got the full answer on that yet. So we're trying to figure out if the governor can do this without additional action by the legislature. And then the secondary question, what would be an appropriate level, obviously. We do think, look, these are folks who are working hard, paying taxes, going to work, now being exposed to coronavirus in our agricultural labor facilities. They're keeping the This is not the only thing this community does, but I'm thinking of them right now because so many of our agricultural workers, many of whom are not documented, are keeping our food supply going on our tables today, and they've had a disproportionate number of infections. So they're on my mind at the moment. So yes, we are looking at that. If there's some way we can do this, we'll have more to say that in the upcoming days.
Next question comes from Jim with the News Tribune.
Governor, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services put out a statement today that it's delivering $177 million in new funding to Washington to support testing. I was wondering what impact this will have. And the statement also makes a reference to that governors have to submit a plan to HHS for testing, including goals for the remainder of the calendar year.
Well, obviously, this would be helpful if the federal government can help us financially, but to be honest with you, and we will accept this, and I assume we will propose a plan that I presume will be satisfactory because we have a really good strategy on how to do testing and good prioritization, and I assume that will be satisfactory. But I have to tell you, the impediment that we've had on testing is not financial. We have been able to pour whatever money is necessary to get the testing supplies. The lack of money has not constrained us. What has constrained us is a simple lack of supplies. They could have $3 trillion, but there were no swabs to buy. So this has been a manufacturing problem, and as you know, we have been pleading with the administration for months now to use the Defense Production Act in all of its application to increase the number of swabs that are being developed, the number of transport viral medium that is produced, and the amount of reagent that is necessary in the testing process. The administration was extremely slow to begin that process, and governors, Republicans and Democrats, have been pleading with the president to increase the manufacturing about this because it wasn't the money that was the problem. We just didn't have the swabs being made. So the administration has started to do that. We want to encourage them to accelerate that because it's not enough now. We still do not have enough manufacturing in the United States to provide the states for what they need. And by the way, this is both Republicans and Democrat governors are telling the president this on a regular basis. So when I hear the president say that, testing is overrated, and when he said months ago, everybody can get tested, it was just so much baloney. I couldn't believe that. I mean, I almost fell out of my chair when I heard him say this 2 months ago when he said everybody can get tested, when we were struggling to even get first responders tested. So that type of attitude has not been helpful. We hope it will improve. There are people in the administration, we have a couple vice admirals who are working on this program. I think their hearts are in the right place, but we could use more presidential help on this.
Next question comes from Hannah with Cairo Radio.
Hi, Governor. A couple of questions. First, for all of the counties approved for variances now that can move to phase 2, will they be allowed to move to phase 3 when the rest of the state can go to phase 2? And also, hoping you can provide some context. There was some comments you made last week to, I believe, Senator Sanders, suggesting the COVID crisis is an economic opportunity or opportunity to advance climate change. Can you clarify what those comments meant?
Yeah, phase 3, it will not be automatic for the counties that are now in phase 2. It won't be automatic into phase 3. We'll have the same kind of process that we have now. And they might be able, it might be coincident, so they might be able to do that at the same time, but it's not necessarily linked. We'll continue to look at this on a data-driven process. Look, it is really clear that our nation needs at least a couple things right now. We need a huge increase in economic activity, and we need a federal leadership on that to create a demand to turn the spigot of our economy on full blast. We need, I believe, something of the scale of the thing that did get us out of the first Great Depression. I studied economics at the UW. I don't consider myself an economist, but I do believe that we know that what really got us out of the Great Depression was World War II and the massive investment in the armament that helped us maintain freedom. That put millions of Americans to work. It put money in their pockets, and it was the shot of adrenaline that really restarted the U.S. economy. It just kind of stumbled along for years until we got that huge infusion of new demand. I believe that we need a similar effort for other things that the nation needs right now. And there are several things that we know that we need. I made reference to some of them a little bit earlier. We know we need a huge infrastructure project to rebuild the transportation infrastructure of our country. Anybody who's suffering their commutes right now on I-5 or I-405 recognizes the need for additional infrastructure. You look at the West Seattle Bridge, incredibly expensive project that we need to rebuild, and hopefully that we can do that. The need to rebuild the bridge over the Columbia River on I-5, which is a project of statewide significance. That bridge was built during the Woodrow Wilson administration. It needs to be replaced. So we have enormous needs for transportation infrastructure. We have enormous needs to rebuild our energy system so that it is less polluting and more healthy. And that is a nationwide need. It predated the COVID crisis because the climate crisis predated COVID. But the opportunity to build our economy helps our economy as well as the health aspects of climate change. And we know we need to rebuild our utilities. Our water and utilities and sewer systems are decrepit. If you ever look at the Society of American Engineers, they do a study and they evaluate the utilities, and they give almost everywhere a D because they're old and they're falling apart. So the point of comments I made the other day was this is a moment where we should not allow the opponents, the people who deny climate change, to use the COVID as an excuse not to deal with climate change. That was my point. And the point is that this is going to help rebuild our economy. And I really fundamentally believe that.
Last question. Final question comes from Austin with Northwest News Network.
Oh, hi, Governor. I'm curious whether you are contemplating some sort of statewide mandate that people wear masks as we start reopening the economy. But also more to the point about your announcement today regarding these additional counties, what about the other 17 counties, which comprise, I think, about 70% of the population? How likely are they to be moving to phase 2 towards the end of this month into early June?
Yeah, on masks, we're going to have a little more to say about this, but our thinking at the moment is to basically have a requirement that businesses make it clear that they encourage their patrons when they're inside to wear face coverings and masks. We think that's the right approach. We want to have broad usage of masks when we're inside in public. We've learned that inside conditions keep the virus in where it hovers. And as we learn more about this virus, we've learned that it's more transmittable than we knew. That even breathing and talking loud even projects things further. And so we do think the very wide use of face coverings and masks is extremely important, and the scientific community now supports that. Now, when we use a non-N95 mask, a face covering that's cloth or a surgical mask, we are protecting someone else, not ourselves. We are protecting our neighbor who might be in the grocery store standing next to us. But that has great value. An N95 protects us when we wear it, but that face covering protects your neighbors and your coworkers and other folks. So we'll have more specific guidance on this, but this is one of the things that I think is really important to think about because, again, we're putting aside what has been an effective strategy, which is social distancing, and we're putting that aside so we can get back to restarting our economy. But we have to replace that with something, and that means replace it with additional use of masks and face coverings and more contact tracing and testing and more isolation. And the reason I point this out is we've had sort of this blunt instrument where the whole community was really hurting our economy and hurting our personal lives. We now are moving to a situation where the weapon of choice is in our individual lives. And that kind of means we all are going to have to think about the things we can do in our personal lives using masks, maintaining social distancing, still thinking about how we orient our offices so that people aren't exposed. Maybe you don't have to need your mask when you're sitting at your desk, but look at when you're in the lunchroom and you're sitting next to people or even congregating, those masks have real value. So we are going to have, at the moment, this is not a decision, thinking about requiring businesses to encourage customers on a voluntary basis to help out in this regard. As far as the other counties, so the other counties unfortunately have too high infections to justify moving to phase 2 at this moment. But hopefully their numbers will come down over time, and we look at them on a daily basis. And there has been some progress in this regard. So we'll continue to monitor them and look at them. We are hopeful that we can, in many, if not all of these counties, move forward on June 1. But we cannot predict the status of the virus on that date. No one can. We're going to have to make real-time decisions as we look at this. But I know that all of us who want that to happen on June 1, we can do something about this. We can continue to socially distance. We can wear masks. We can make good individual decisions. And the more of us who do those things, the more people that are compliant with this order, the more likelihood that we could move forward on June 1. And by the way, I want to tell you that I know how frustrating this is to people. It would just be such a delight. I would love to be able to say, here's the date. We're all going back to work on that date. I mean, that would be a cause for giant celebration. And I'd love to be able to do that because this is so hard on people. But we got to make decisions based on what's responsible and based on health, and that's what we're going to continue to do. With that, thank you very much. Please wash your hands.